Hey everyone, this is Anthony and I am back. I know it's been a while since I really took the time to do any type of podcast or kind of my thoughts. Today I wanted to talk about something that is on my mind since this is something that's been happening in the last week or so. What I'm talking about today is the arresting of Don Lemon in Minneapolis. The protests and all the reactions have followed that I've been observing online. So I've been watching clips, reading comments, and really trying to understand and make sense of how people are responding, especially online, where just the anger and outrage, also the defense of him, how people are being selective on how they frame and explain the event and things that stand out to me. So much going on. This is about protests, faith, journalism, politics, ideology, law, just the way that people use morality to justify their reaction. Honestly, it's made me think about how we define right and wrong, what's legal or illegal, what's just unjust. How much is people's anger really about principles, or is it their personal beliefs, or just like a tribal identity in a time where people are more divided than ever? Let's jump into it here by letting you know what happened and what we know so far, or at least what I know. Here's what I have understood. According to Don Lemon, of course, he's been following a lot of the protests that have been happening in Minneapolis. We've seen now the murder and assassination of two U.S. citizens, and just the violence and the disruption of things happening in Minneapolis because of the presence of ICE. And there was a group of protesters that went into a church in Minneapolis during an active service. So their goal was to call attention to some allegations that one of the church leaders or a key member of the church has actual ties to ICE and to immigration enforcement, to really point out to the community that this is happening. Probably point out the hypocrisy of the fact that some people do believe that these are not really ties that someone who claims to be a Christian should have. Don Lemon was there, and from everything that I've seen in videos, he wasn't violent at all. He wasn't threatening anyone. He didn't use force. He was there once he found out that this protest was happening and that they were going to go into the church. He went in there to observe, to document, to have conversations. And you do see that there were multiple people that he interviewed, specifically one of the main pastors. He was having a conversation, asking him some questions. There was a moment even when the pastor lightly pushed him, and you hear Don say, "Don't touch me." And that's about it. That's all he did. It was asked to leave. That happened, and days went by. In the last couple of days, he was at the Grammys. I didn't watch the Grammys, but he was on a carpet event and he ended up getting arrested. Then very quickly he was released. But between that moment of him being arrested, there was such a huge reaction online, especially from all sides. I'm going to be honest. When I look at things online, I see everything. I come across differing views on how people see it, both from a liberal and a conservative side. But the ones that really stood out to me that I was just so dumbfounded by was conservative Christians. People who are MAGA, who identify with Christianity, Christian nationalism. What I was seeing is people just cheering and celebrating the fact that he was arrested, because to them, that symbolizes that their faith is being defended. That to me is kind of when things start to really get interesting, because if I take a step back I would encourage you to take a step back as well. I think it's clear that people celebrating his arrest is not about the fact that the church service was interrupted, that they went inside a church. It's more to do about politics and narratives. I want to unpack that. When I see people online celebrating the fact that for a brief moment Don Lemon was arrested, I don't think it's because, honestly, they say it's about the religious service being disrupted and then going into the church and disrupting. But I don't think it's about faith in the sense of personal relationship with God and personal relationship with God. I think it's more about anger towards the left. It's more political to me than religious. It's about punishing the left. It's about controlling narratives, and to go with this idea that's been being pushed a lot, that somehow Christianity is under a threat, under attack. By arresting him, they're making it a political issue to send a message and a warning to people that if you question this administration or you report on things that they don't like, you could be next and a target. Don Lemon is really being used as a public example. It's clear when you see the online chatter, the way that it's being framed, the language people are using, the comparisons to attacks on Christianity. People are not really celebrating that the church was protected. They're celebrating that his arrest sends a message. And that's a dangerous precedent, I think, because I agree. Some of this is something that people probably have a dislike for him personally. I've seen some people kind of point out that they don't like Don Lemon. And I'm sure you've seen it. People are calling him all kinds of names, and even getting personal. You have Nicki Minaj being homophobic and going to a level that's just completely unnecessary. And you call yourself a Christian and speak about other human beings like that. Bigger picture for me is that this idea of power. So using the law, public opinion, and anger from people to make a political point is really what they're doing. And the point is controlling who can speak, what stories can be told, who has access, who is telling the truth, who has the legitimate story. I mean, you have this administration who's controlling what journalists can and cannot cover the White House. And that's really what is troubling to me and has me thinking, because when anyone is cheering on or celebrating the fact that a journalist has been arrested for doing a job, you are cheering on and celebrating the silencing of information, and that's highly inappropriate and a very heavy thing to do if you really think about it. And I've been just asking myself, like, where is the line between a protest and harassment, and who finds that? Because that is something that a lot of people are complaining about as well. Where can you protest? Where can you not protest? Who decides that? I've always thought that it's interesting because, as in a general sense, I always kind of society tells us, oh, if you're going to protest, you need to protest peacefully. I mean, that's one of the reasons that they celebrate Martin Luther King so much. It's not necessarily for the changes he made, but sometimes it feels like it's just a way to control how people should protest, because, you can take your signs, you can chant, you can go on a march. And I've gone to that. I mean, some of you have seen, the videos of me going to protests, like the No Kings rally and all that stuff. And when I've gone, I've had signs, I stand in the street, I cheer along with people who are there as well. And I even boo, like sometimes every now and then people who are there just to make it a point, I guess, that they disagree with the purpose of the rallying. I boo people. I call them out, because if they're there to cause trouble, to antagonize, I express my frustration and my distaste for them being there, and feeling unified with everyone who is there for a certain cause instead of trying to be there to disrupt. But here's the thing. Sometimes it starts to feel like we're doing all this protesting and it doesn't work. That makes no changes. The government doesn't respond. You have weak ass leaders, a weak ass Democratic Party, and branches of government that just bend the knee to this authoritarian in power. And so when you see that policies aren't changing, that things are not improving, that actually things are getting worse, and that people are getting hurt, and now even murder. I mean, look what ICE is doing to the streets of Minneapolis, to the state, overreaching, terrorizing, harassing, and killing citizens. It's frustrating, and to be honest, I'm just fed up with what I see. So I can understand why some people who are continuing to stay in the fight probably have a hard time not escalating themselves, because there's a lot of distrust and anger and frustration. And so some people take actions that is much more than just, holding a sign. And I want to be honest, like, personally myself, I never go into a church and disrupt a church service. That's just not me. That's not what I would do. But I can understand why other people might feel like, in that moment, it's a way that something that's very crucial can be called attention to, and that the church itself has a responsibility. If someone that's ahead of an organization is tied to things that are harming and causing injustice to the community, people would feel compelled to bring that up. And then I asked myself, well, what is harassment? What happened in that event, is that harassment? And to me, it's harming people, physical violence, threats, intimidation, damaging property, not leaving when you're asked to leave, but coming into a church, disrupting the service, offending or making people uncomfortable, that's protest. That is not harassment. And I think it's important to make that distinction, because too many times people confuse the two, especially when it's your own ideas and beliefs and ideology that's involved. So, I mean, if you think about it, what if this happened in a school instead of a church? Like, let's say there was a principal at a school, and they find out that the principal is tied to ICE, and protesters come inside the class to call attention to it. Would there have been the same outrage about the fact that it happened at a school, as opposed to like whether it's a high school or a college? Would there be the same kind of outrage to how it happened at a church? Would the same conservative Christians be as vocal about it? I'm not sure they would. Maybe some would, but I don't think the majority would be. And I think this is all showing that there's selective outrage, and so much of it is tied to people's identity, ideology, and, acting like victims of a attack on is more that it's more that's involved there. And, to give you a little context of where I come from, and kind of how I guess, view things and talk about this stuff. I actually grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. I've mentioned that before, and I am a lot going person. I was dedicated to my relationship with God, to follow, biblical principles, things that I was taught, and I lived my life by that for a very long time. But I never tried to impose what I believed onto other people. Yeah, we were taught to preach. We would go to door, and we talk to people about certain, biblical topics, societal topics, but it was voluntary, and we would just try to have conversations with people. And if someone I'm not interested, that was it. Okay, well, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. We wouldn't push, we wouldn't force, we wouldn't try to, indoctrinate people or shove something down people's throat. And because of that, that is why I do have this different point of view about how I would never really go inside a church to disrupt the service. It's just not something that I would do. But as I'm seeing like everything that's been happening in regards to this whole situation and Don Lemon, I can see, I mean, we've been seeing what ICE is doing to our immigration communities, our brothers and sisters who are here, maybe without having come here legally. It's frustrating. It's strange to see how people are being dehumanized, and I can understand why so many people are frustrated and angry. And when you see injustice happening in your community and feel like the government is just escalating that and no one is doing anything about it, I think that's where you can get a lot of tension and kind of misunderstanding of what's lawful, what's moral, what's right, and what's